She never walked, not because she couldn't, but because her mother told her she was. Everyone thought her mom was a hero, until one night that same mother was stabbed 17 times by the daughter she spent her life protecting. This isn't fiction, this is real Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Her name now echoes in fear and sympathy. A victim who became a killer, a mother who turned out to be the captor. This isn't just a murder story, it's a psychological war. A prison made of medicine, manipulation, and a love so twisted, it turned deadly. Asterisk. Once you start this story, you won't be able to look away, because by the end, you won't know who the real monster is. Think you've seen the worst part? You're wrong. What comes next will shatter everything you thought you knew. Don't even think about clicking away because the real truth is still coming. In the quiet suburb of Springfield, Missouri, nestled within a modest neighborhood, lived a mother and daughter who became the center of national attention. At first glance, Dee Blanchard appeared to be the very definition of a devoted mother, caring, selfless, and fiercely protective of her sick child. Gypsy Rose, their story was one of tragedy and perseverance, a mother doing everything she could to give her terminally ill daughter a meaningful life. They were featured in charity events, newspaper articles, and local news reports. Their faces appeared in fundraising campaigns, as strangers across America reached into their pockets to help this suffering family. Dee Dee's daughter, Gypsy, was presented as a helpless victim of dozens of rare and complex illnesses. She was confined to a wheelchair, had the mental capacity of a child, and required round-the-clock medical care. But beneath that surface, beneath the oxygen tubes, the childlike clothing, and the sorrowful smiles was a lie so massive, so deeply constructed, that it would eventually explode into one of the most shocking crimes of the decade. The world saw a sick child and a saintly mother. What they didn't see was the manipulation, the abuse, and the silent suffering happening behind closed doors. This is the beginning of the story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, not the innocent child everyone thought they knew, and not the heartless killer the headlines later claimed, but a girl trapped in a life built on lies, a girl whose freedom came only through murder. Dee Blanchard was always in control. She controlled the narrative. She controlled the medical appointments. She controlled how Gypsy looked, spoke, and even how she breathed. From the moment Gypsy was a toddler, Dee had begun telling doctors that something was wrong. She claimed her daughter had muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, vision problems, developmental delays, and even leukemia. The diagnoses didn't come from one single hospital or specialist. Instead, Dee shopped for doctors the way most people shop for clothes, moving from state to state, doctor to doctor, always with new paperwork, new stories, and new evidence of her daughter's declining health. And time after time, professionals believed her. Dee came across as knowledgeable, caring, and completely devoted. In their eyes, she was a single mother with a severely disabled daughter doing the best she could under tragic circumstances. The lies started early. Gypsy was born in 1991, a healthy baby girl. But by the time she was a toddler, Dee was telling people her daughter had sleep apnea and needed a breathing machine. Soon, the illnesses began to multiply. She told people Gypsy had a chromosomal disorder that affected her growth and learning, that she couldn't walk, that her muscles would, that she needed a feeding tube. Over time, the real Gypsy began to disappear under a mountain of medical interventions. By the age of 7, Gypsy had already undergone multiple surgeries, had all of her teeth removed due to side effects from medication, and was using a wheelchair full-time despite having no actual physical impairment requiring it. She was given medications she didn't need, taken to hospitals for symptoms she never described, and kept out of school under the guise of homeschooling. But there was no real education. Dee didn't want Gypsy to know too much. A smart, curious child might ask too many questions, might figure out the truth. The public image of the Blanchards was carefully curated. Dee dressed Gypsy in brightly colored, childlike outfits with large glasses and wigs to cover up hair loss from medications. She told everyone that Gypsy had the mental age of a 7-year-old and needed constant supervision. It didn't matter that Gypsy was a teenager. Dee wanted the world to see a forever child, innocent and fragile, entirely dependent on her mother. When Hurricane Katrina hit their home in Louisiana, Dee used the opportunity to claim their medical records had been destroyed. This made it easier to start over in Missouri, where she quickly established new relationships with doctors, charities, and local organizations. Their new home, built by Habitat for Humanity, was custom designed for a wheelchair user. They received free flights, backstage passes to Disney World, and thousands of dollars in donations. The entire community rallied around them. But no one questioned why Gypsy never got better or why she seemed strangely quiet during interviews, always letting her mother do the talking. The truth was simple but horrifying. Gypsy was being abused not with fists or shouting, but with needles, lies, and manipulation. Her mother wasn't caring for her. She was controlling her, and Gypsy had no way out. This kind of abuse is not new, though it's rarely recognized. What Dee was doing had a name: Munchausen syndrome by proxy. It is a rare psychological condition in which a caregiver, usually a parent, exaggerates or entirely fabricates medical conditions in someone under their care in order to gain attention, sympathy, or control. In Dee's case, it was all three. She thrived on being seen as a martyr, the loving mother who gave up her own life to care for a terminally ill child. Every compliment fed her ego. Every donation reinforced her lies. Every interview solidified her role as a hero. The tragedy is that the person suffering most, Gypsy, was invisible in plain sight. She was told from an early age that she was sick, fragile, and mentally slow. And because she was isolated from friends, doctors, and even school, she believed it. She accepted that she couldn't walk, that she had to take her medicine, that the outside world was dangerous. Every part of her life was monitored. Dee Dee controlled what she ate, what she wore, what shows she watched. She would punish Gypsy for questioning anything, sometimes by withholding food or over-medicating her. At other times, she'd simply go crying that Gypsy didn't love her, that she was the only one who would ever care for her. This manipulation created a toxic, prison-like environment. And over time, Gypsy's confusion turned into silent rebellion. As Gypsy got older, cracks began to form in the story. Her body didn't feel weak like her mother claimed. She could walk when no one was looking. Her mind was sharper than her mother said. But any time she brought up these doubts, Dee Dee shut her down. Still, curiosity began to grow. In secret, Gypsy found ways to access the internet. Using a hidden laptop at night, she started researching her own illnesses, discovered that nothing added up. The medications she was taking didn't match her symptoms. The feeding tube wasn't necessary. And most shocking of all, she was much older than her mother claimed. Dee Dee had been lying about Gypsy's age for years, shaving off entire birthdays to keep her childlike. Her birth certificate had been altered. Even doctors weren't sure how old she really was. Gypsy thought she was 15 or 16 when she was already in her 20s. The realization shattered her, not just because her life was a lie, but because her mother had taken everything from her. Her childhood, her independence, her identity. She had no friends, no schooling, no future. She was a prisoner of someone else's need for attention. Still, Gypsy was careful. She knew her mother was watching, so she played along during the day, smiling, waving, going to doctor appointments, taking her pills. But at night, she started planning her escape. She joined online forums for teens and made secret social media accounts. She dreamed of running away, of meeting someone who could save her, of a life where she could walk, talk, and live like a normal young woman. That dream would eventually lead her to someone named Nicholas Godijan, a man she met online who would become her boyfriend, her accomplice, and ultimately, her mother's killer. But that part of the story comes later. For now, in the quiet streets of Missouri, no one suspected a thing. Dee Dee continued her charade. The neighbors saw nothing but love between mother and daughter. Charities still donated. Doctors still treated her. And Gypsy still smiled for the cameras. Behind that smile was fear, anger, confusion, and the growing belief that the only way to escape this life might be through death, not her own. Her mother's. You've heard her side. You've seen what she lived through. Now ask yourself, is she a murderer or a survivor? Stay till the end. Decide for yourself. From the outside, the small pastel-colored home in Springfield, Missouri looked like a dream come true for a struggling single mother and her disabled daughter. The house, built by Habitat for Humanity, stood as a symbol of community compassion, reward for a family supposedly plagued by unthinkable medical hardship. The pink siding, white trim, and wheelchair-accessible ramp painted a picture of hope. But inside that house, Gypsy Rose Blanchard was not living a fairy tale. She was trapped in a living nightmare. This so-called home was a prison, one carefully constructed by her mother, Dee Dee Blanchard. The walls were not made of concrete, and there were no bars on the windows. Yet Gypsy was just as confined, just as powerless, as any inmate behind steel doors. Gypsy's life was tightly controlled from the moment she woke up until the second she closed her eyes at night. Her mother monitored everything: her medications, her food, her clothes, her body language, even the way she smiled in public. Dee Dee decided what Gypsy could eat. She soft, bland foods pushed through a feeding tube, even though Gypsy was physically able to chew and swallow. If she reached for something off limits, Dee Dee slapped a hand or warned her about allergic reactions that didn't exist. There were pills every morning and every night, anticonvulsants, painkillers, muscle relaxers, anti-no. Dee Dee insisted these were necessary to control her daughter's dozens of illnesses, though many were either placebo or harmful when taken without cause. Doctors rarely questioned the prescriptions, trusting Dee Dee's carefully prepared medical history. Gypsy took them obediently. She had been trained to believe that if she didn't, she might die. Clothes were another weapon of control. Dee Dee dressed Gypsy in frilly dresses, bright colors, cartoon-themed hats, and oversized glasses. The goal was to make her look much younger than she was, like a sick child in need of protection. In reality, Gypsy was growing older and more aware by the day, but she wasn't allowed to appear her age. Her body had begun to develop like any young woman's, but Dee Dee forced her to stay little in every way possible. She shaved Gypsy's head regularly under the false claim that chemotherapy had caused hair loss. Gypsy later said her mother would sit her down and shave her head bald, telling her it'll fall out anyway. This routine was about more than maintaining a lie. It was about maintaining control. And control was Dee Dee's addiction. The isolation was deliberate. Gypsy had no access to traditional school, no chance to make friends, and no interaction with others unless her mother was present. Dee Dee homeschooled her or claimed she did, but in reality, Gypsy was never properly educated. She was kept intellectually limited on purpose. Dee Dee didn't want a daughter who could read too well or question too much. They rarely had visitors, and when they did, Gypsy was instructed to stay quiet. She had been conditioned to let her mother do all the talking. If she spoke out of turn or said something suspicious, Dee Dee would squeeze her hand or smile in a way that was clearly a warning. Behind the cheerful public persona, there was discipline and punishment. Sometimes it was emotional manipulation, Dee Dee crying, yelling, accusing Gypsy of being ungrateful. Other times it was physical pinching, slapping, or withholding food and medication. Dee Dee would threaten to tell doctors or authorities that Gypsy was crazy or dangerous, warning her that she'd be locked in an institution if she didn't behave. These threats worked. Gypsy was terrified of being abandoned or locked away. Her world was small, and her mother was at the center of it. As much as she wanted freedom, she feared what might happen if she reached for it. The medical appointments never stopped. Dee Dee would transport Gypsy from clinic to clinic, spinning new lies at each location. She claimed her daughter had a seizure disorder, a chromosomal defect, vision and hearing impairments, sleep apnea, and more. She told each specialist just enough to get the next test, the next prescription, the next surgery. When one doctor expressed doubts, she simply moved on to another. Occasionally, someone noticed inconsistencies, missing medical records, unusual test results, symptoms that didn't match diagnoses. But Dee Dee was always one step ahead. She blamed errors on Katrina, on lazy doctors, or on her daughter's confused memory. She also discouraged doctors from speaking directly with Gypsy. And when they did, Gypsy often echoed whatever her mother had told her to say. Gypsy grew from a child into a teenager, then into a young adult. But her body, mind, and identity remained stunted. She believed she was younger than her true age. Dee Dee lied about her birthday constantly. Government records showed different years depending on the form. Even Gypsy herself was unsure how old she really was. She thought she was 15 when she was 19. She thought she was 17 when she was 21. This confusion worked in Dee Dee's favor. The more disoriented Gypsy was about time, health, and reality, the more she depended on her mother. Despite the control, Gypsy wasn't completely blind. She began to notice small things, moments when her body didn't match the symptoms. She could move her legs. She didn't feel weak. She could walk. And sometimes, when Dee Dee left the room, she did. At night, she would secretly stand, walk around the room, or stretch. She wasn't paralyzed. She wasn't sick. And as the realization grew stronger, so did her internal conflict. Why was her mother doing this to her? Gypsy began asking questions, first softly, then more directly. Dee Dee's reactions were harsh and immediate. She would scream at her daughter, medicate her, and even threaten to break her fingers if she used a computer without permission. She told Gypsy, "You don't know what's good for you." To the outside world, Dee Dee was a saint. Inside the home, she was a dictator. Over time, Gypsy developed coping mechanisms. She smiled in public. She nodded politely during interviews. She thanked donors and gave doctors big, grateful eyes. But inside she was screaming. Her entire life had been built around a lie, and she didn't know how to escape it. That house, the pink prison, symbolized everything that was wrong. It had become a stage for a performance neither of them wanted anymore. Dee Dee performed for praise. Gypsy performed for survival. They were trapped together, locked in a codependent, abusive cycle that no one else could see, and no one came to help. Not neighbors, not doctors, not charities. Everyone loved the story too much to question it. Eventually, Gypsy realized she had to help herself. Her mother monitored everything. But late at night, when Dee Dee was asleep, Gypsy found ways to access the internet. She'd steal brief moments on a hidden laptop or borrow a neighbor's device. It was dangerous. Dee Dee had beaten her once for looking at a Facebook message without permission. But Gypsy was willing to risk it. She started researching her medical conditions. And the more she read, the more shocked she became. Her medications didn't make sense. Her diagnoses were inconsistent. The symptoms didn't line up with anything real. And then came the biggest discovery, her real age. She found old photos, articles, and legal documents that contradicted the age Dee Dee had claimed. It was like a veil had been lifted. Her life had been a fiction crafted by someone who was supposed to protect her. But what could she do? Gypsy knew no one would believe her. If she went to the police, they'd likely side with her mother. If she told doctors, they'd say she was mentally ill. If she ran away, where would she go? She had no ID, no education, no money, no real-world experience. So instead, she made a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. She would look for someone online, someone who could help her escape, someone who might even love her. In secret, Gypsy began chatting with people through online forums and dating sites. She used fake names and pictures, pretending to be a healthy, normal teenager. For the first time in her life, she felt in control of her identity. That's when she met Nicholas Godesian. He wasn't perfect. In fact, he had a history of mental illness and disturbing behavior. But he offered Gypsy something she had never experienced before: attention, affection, and the promise of escape. Their online relationship grew quickly. They spoke of love, of running away together, of starting a new life. But it wasn't just fantasy, because soon, those late-night chats turned into a deadly plan. In the digital age, freedom can sometimes come through a screen. For Gypsy Rose Blanchard, who had spent nearly her entire life in a fabricated reality controlled by her mother, the internet was more than just a source of entertainment. It was her window to the outside world, her secret escape route, and ultimately the portal through which she would meet the man who would change everything. Behind the sweet smile and soft voice that America had come to associate with a sickly, wheelchair-bound girl was someone very different. A girl with questions, a girl with a growing awareness, a girl who was no longer willing to be a puppet in her mother's elaborate performance. And as she explored the world through forbidden clicks and stolen keystrokes, Gypsy began to rewrite the script of her own life, one secret message at a time. Gypsy's first experiences with the internet were limited and monitored. Her mother kept a tight grip on technology, aware that too much information could unravel years of carefully woven lies. But Gypsy was clever and resourceful. When Dee Dee slept or became distracted, Gypsy would steal moments online using an old laptop or borrowed devices from neighbors. She started cautiously searching for Disney fan pages, TV shows she wasn't allowed to watch, and forums about health. But soon, her searches became more personal. She looked up medical conditions that her mother said she had and began realizing that none of the symptoms matched her experiences. She read about muscular dystrophy and feeding tubes and found herself asking, "Why don't I feel that way?" Those moments were like, they didn't just reveal medical facts, they shattered her reality. For years, Gypsy believed she was gravely ill, mentally impaired, and incapable of living on her own. But now she saw the truth. She wasn't sick, she wasn't mentally challenged. She had been lied to systematically and deliberately. Her life, as she knew it, had been constructed on falsehoods. The horror of that realization was overwhelming. It wasn't just her medical records or age that had been manipulated, it was her entire sense of identity. Her mother had stolen her body, her mind, and her future. But instead of breaking down, Gypsy became determined. As her confidence online grew, she ventured into chat rooms, Facebook groups, and role-play forums. She created alternate personas, healthy, independent, flirtatious versions of herself that could laugh, walk, and speak freely. These fake identities gave her the freedom she lacked in real life and helped her explore who she really was without her mother's watchful eyes. She began engaging with boys online, mostly harmless chats at first, but Gypsy wasn't just looking for romance. She was searching for rescue, someone who could love her, understand her, and maybe help her escape. In 2012, she met Nicholas Godijon through a Christian dating site. Their connection was immediate and intense. Nicholas was a socially awkward man in his early 20s from Wisconsin with a documented history of autism and mental health struggles. He was different just like her, and that made him feel safe. Nicholas, too, lived in isolation. He had been bullied, misunderstood, and lonely. Their conversations quickly turned romantic, and within weeks, they considered each other boyfriend and girlfriend. To Gypsy, he wasn't just a romantic partner, he was a lifeline. She began confiding in him, slowly revealing details about her life, her mother, and the truth she had discovered. Nicholas was shocked and then angry. He believed her. He validated her suffering, and he promised he would never let anyone hurt her again. That promise would soon become deadly. You think this is just another true crime story? Then you haven't seen the final 5 minutes. What's revealed at the end will leave you stunned and questioning everything. So, stay with me all the way. Their relationship, though entirely virtual, intensified quickly. They developed elaborate fantasy roles, including BDSM elements where Nicholas often portrayed a darker alter ego, someone violent, controlling, and possessive. Gypsy played along, not always because she enjoyed it, but because it made Nicholas feel connected to her. She saw these fantasies as part of the price she had to pay for someone to love her. More importantly, she believed he was the only one who could save her. Their secret romance lasted for years. They would message late at night, sometimes video chat when Dee Dee wasn't around. Gypsy would dress up, whisper through the webcam, and tell Nicholas how much she wanted to be with him in real life. But the logistics were impossible. Dee Dee never let Gypsy out of her sight. There was no way they could meet in person, or so it seemed. Then, in 2015, Gypsy came up with a bold plan. She convinced Dee Dee to take her to see Cinderella at the movie theater. Nicholas traveled to Springfield without Dee Dee knowing and accidentally bumped into them at the cinema, pretending to be a stranger. It was the first time Gypsy and Nicholas met face to face. They shared a secret moment in the bathroom, kissed, and whispered about their love. But Gypsy knew there was no way she could tell her mother the truth. Dee Dee was suspicious of men, paranoid about Gypsy having a boyfriend. Any mention of Nicholas would result in punishment, possibly physical. The meeting only deepened their obsession with each other. Gypsy became increasingly desperate. She wanted to run away. She wanted Nicholas to come get her. But there was a problem. She had no ID, no money, no freedom. Even her medical documents were under Dee Dee's name. Nicholas kept offering her one solution. "I'll kill your mother." At first, Gypsy thought he was joking. Then she realized he wasn't. The more they talked, the more detailed their plan became. Late-night texts turned into blueprints for murder. They discussed how Nicholas would come to Missouri, wait until Dee Dee was asleep, and then stab her. Gypsy would unlock the door. She would cover for it. She would clean the mess. To Gypsy, it didn't feel like murder. It felt like escape. She had tried everything else. Hints, questions, obedience. Nothing worked. No one listened. No one believed her. She believed that only through her mother's death could she finally live. In her mind, this wasn't about revenge, it was survival. Nicholas bought a bus ticket, packed a knife, gloves, and duct tape. Gypsy sent him money for the ticket money. She had secretly saved from online charity gifts that Dee Dee never knew she accessed. She also mailed him a weapon and knife she had hidden in her room, wrapped and shipped like a package to her own executioner. In June 2015, the plan went into action. Nicholas arrived in Springfield. Gypsy gave him directions. She waited until her mother fell asleep and then unlocked the front door. She hid in the bathroom with her ears covered, waiting for the sounds she had agreed to, sounds she could never unhear. Within minutes, Dee Dee Blanchard was dead, stabbed multiple times in her bed. Gypsy cleaned the scene, gathered a few belongings, and left with Nicholas. They stayed in a motel for a few days. She felt free but also terrified. She had never been outside on her own, never chosen her own clothes, never eaten what she wanted. But in those first hours, Gypsy wore shorts for the first time, ate junk food, laughed freely. Nicholas, in his own disturbed way, saw himself as the hero of her story. And for a brief moment, Gypsy believed it too. They took a Greyhound bus back to Wisconsin. Gypsy planned to start a new life, there get documents, build an identity, maybe go back to school. She thought she was finally free, but she had made one mistake. Back in Missouri, Dee Dee's body was discovered after concerned neighbors called the police. The Facebook post that Gypsy had written, sarcastic, cryptic, and angry, had drawn attention. That'd be asterisk, 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 as dead. At first, people thought it was a hack, then they thought it was a joke. But when no one answered the door, they called for a welfare check. Inside, police found Dee Dee's body in an empty wheelchair. Everyone feared the worst. Gypsy had been kidnapped. Social media exploded. News outlets picked up the story. Prayers flooded in. But within 48 hours, authorities traced the IP address from the Facebook post to a home in Wisconsin. Gypsy and Nicholas were arrested without incident, and the truth began to spill out. When the mugshots were released, people were shocked. Gypsy was standing, no wheelchair, no feeding tube, no medications. She looked like a completely different person. Questions poured in. Where was her illness? Why was she walking? How could a sick, helpless girl commit murder? The narrative flipped almost overnight. Gypsy went from victim to villain. Dee Dee, once adored, became a symbol of manipulation. The community felt betrayed. They had donated money, time, and love, and it had all been based on lies. But as the interrogation tapes surfaced, a different story emerged. Gypsy told the police everything, from the fake illnesses to the abuse, from the years of manipulation to the murder plot, and the world began to see her not just as a killer but as a prisoner who had finally broken free. In every fairy tale, the princess finds a way to escape her tower. But in Gypsy Rose Blanchard's world, there was no magic wand, no brave knight, and no open door. Only shadows, secrets, and a growing desperation that consumed her every thought. For nearly 2 decades, she had been trapped in a fictional identity, a childlike, disabled girl created and maintained by her mother's lies. And now, she believed there was only one way out. Murder wasn't a sudden idea or a crime of passion. It was premeditated, calculated, and built slowly through years of emotional manipulation, abuse, and a twisted love story born online. As the days grew darker, Gypsy's imagination transformed into determination, and her secret relationship with Nicholas Gadesian became a weapon aimed directly at the woman who had stolen her life. Gypsy had known for a long time that she needed to escape her mother's control, but in her isolated world, options were limited. She had no formal education, no identification, no job, no bank account, and no legal way to break free. She didn't even know how to navigate public transportation. Dee Dee had made sure of that. Running away wasn't just difficult, it was nearly impossible. Every prior attempt Gypsy made to push back ended in punishment. If she asked about her real age, Dee Dee lied. If she questioned her medication, Dee Dee accused her of being ungrateful. When Gypsy once tried to escape with a man she met at a sci-fi convention, Dee Dee found her, brought her home, smashed her phone, and chained her to the bed. So when Nicholas Gadesian entered her life in 2012, he didn't just become a love interest. He became her only hope. They talked every day through secret Facebook accounts. Gypsy would hide under blankets late at night, whispering into her phone, telling Nicholas about the abuse, the lies, and her longing for freedom. Nicholas listened. He believed her, and he became obsessed with the idea of saving her. But Nicholas wasn't a typical man. Diagnosed with autism and various mental health disorders, he often struggled to separate fantasy from reality. He was prone to dark thoughts and had violent tendencies. Yet Gypsy clung to him not because he was perfect, but because he was all she had. Their relationship escalated quickly. They created roleplay characters. Nicholas had multiple online personas, including a sinister alter ego named Victor who was aggressive and possessive. Gypsy played submissive roles, sometimes reluctantly, to keep him emotionally attached. Their conversations became increasingly intense, mixing sexual fantasy with violent thoughts. until one day Nicholas proposed something shocking. He said, "I'll kill your mother for you." It was the first time Gypsy heard the words spoken out loud, even if through text. She didn't respond immediately. For days, she mulled it over. Was this just a twisted joke, or a real offer? She began imagining a life without Didi, a life where she could eat what she wanted, wear dull clothes, walk without pretending, have friends, get an education, a life where she didn't need a wheelchair or feeding tube or lies. That life seemed impossible as long as her mother was alive. So she typed back, "I want to be free." The plan was slowly built, message by message. Nicholas would come to Missouri. Gypsy would unlock the door. Didi would be asleep. He would kill her quickly. Gypsy would clean up afterward. They would leave the house together, get on a bus, and start a new life in Wisconsin. Nicholas promised he would protect Gypsy forever, that they would be together, that she would never have to pretend again. They discussed everything in disturbing detail. Gypsy mailed him money for his bus ticket funds she had saved from donations people had given to her mother. She sent him gloves, duct tape, and even a knife hidden in a package. She arranged the trip around her mother's schedule, carefully choosing a night when Didi would be asleep early and neighbors wouldn't notice. Despite the violent nature of the plan, Gypsy viewed it as an act of liberation, not revenge. In her mind, she was removing an obstacle, ending the suffering she had endured silently for years. She didn't see herself as a killer. She saw herself as someone about to reclaim her stolen life. But that life would come at a terrible cost. On June 10, 2015, Nicholas boarded a Greyhound bus bound for Springfield, Missouri. He carried the tools for murder in his backpack. Gypsy tracked his progress online, growing more nervous with each update. They had rehearsed everything, but the reality was far scarier than any message or roleplay. Gypsy's heart pounded. She took a deep breath and smiled at her mother, who was sitting beside her watching TV, completely unaware that her daughter had just set her death in motion. That night, Gypsy unlocked the front door while Didi was asleep in bed. She handed Nicholas a knife and waited in the bathroom with her hands over her ears. She later said she didn't want to see it. She couldn't bear to watch, but she knew what was happening. Within minutes, it was over. Gypsy Blanchard was stabbed 17 times in her sleep. Blood covered the sheets, soaked the mattress, splattered the walls. Nicholas emerged from the room, shaken but smiling. He washed off the blood while Gypsy cried. She hadn't expected it to be so real, so sudden, so brutal, but it was done. They cleaned the scene as best they could. Gypsy wiped down surfaces, packed a bag, and retrieved money from the house. She left behind the wheelchair, the oxygen tanks, the medications, and the wigs. For the first time in her life, she walked out of the front door on her own feet into the world as a free woman. They checked into a nearby motel for the night. Surveillance footage later captured them at a local store buying snacks, laughing, acting like a couple on vacation. Gypsy wore shorts for the first time, a tank top, no wig, no glasses. Nicholas held her hand. They kissed in public. She was tasting freedom. It felt surreal. The next morning they took a bus to Wisconsin. Gypsy had planned to live there with Nicholas, start over, get her documents, maybe go to school. She imagined a normal life, quiet, hidden, but hers. But the world didn't stay quiet for long. Back in Missouri, Didi's absence didn't go unnoticed. She and Gypsy were active on social media, and friends became concerned when neither answered messages. Then, a bizarre and disturbing Facebook post appeared on the shared account. Gypsy secretly ran. Greater than that, B******** is dead. At first, people thought it was a prank or a hack, but the post was too shocking, too sudden. Friends called the police. When officers arrived at the home, the front door was locked. The car was still in the driveway. The windows were dark. What they found inside stunned the entire town. Didi's body lay in the bedroom, decomposing in blood-soaked sheets. The house was a mess, cluttered with medical supplies, stuffed animals, oxygen machines, unopened prescriptions. But there was no sign of Gypsy, and the wheelchair was still there. People feared the worst. Had Gypsy been kidnapped, killed, taken by whoever murdered her mother? The story made national news within hours. Authorities quickly traced their Facebook post to an IP address registered in Big Bend, Wisconsin. Nicholas Gottesjohn's home. Police raided the house and found Gypsy and Nicholas hiding in a bedroom. They were arrested without resistance. The next chapter of the story would unravel like a nightmare written backward. Gypsy was walking, smiling, coherent, clearly not disabled. Suddenly, the public narrative collapsed. The helpless, sickly child had become a healthy young woman accused of murder. Didi went from martyr to manipulator, and the world had questions. How could a girl who was supposed to be dying walk into a courtroom unassisted? Why had no one known the truth before? Was Gypsy a cold-blooded killer or the ultimate victim? As police interviews began, Gypsy told everything. She spoke in a soft, calm voice as she described years of abuse, deception, control, and desperation. She said she never wanted to kill her mother, but she had no other choice. She had been groomed into silence, then driven to escape by any means necessary. The more she talked, the clearer the picture became. Dee had created a fictional version of her daughter and maintained it through psychological warfare. Medical professionals had missed it, neighbors had ignored it, the system had failed her, and when no one else intervened, Gypsy took matters into her own hands. For many, that truth was hard to process. Could the act of murder be a cry for help? Could a killer be a victim? On June 14, 2015, the people of Springfield, Missouri awoke to headlines that made their blood run cold. Claudine D. Blanchard had been found dead in her home, stabbed multiple times in what appeared to be a brutal home invasion. But more terrifying than the murder itself was what appeared to be missing. Her disabled daughter, Gypsy Rose. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers feared the worst. Had Gypsy, the fragile young girl who couldn't walk, been abducted? Was she killed too? Why was her wheelchair left behind? Why wasn't her oxygen tank with her? And then came the twist. Within 48 hours, Gypsy was found alive, walking, and smiling in Wisconsin. No signs of the dozens of illnesses she was said to suffer from. The girl who was supposed to be sick was healthy. The victim was not what she seemed, and the woman everyone thought was a selfless mother. She was exposed as a liar, a manipulator, and a long-term abuser. What unfolded in the days, weeks, and months that followed shocked the world and forced people to re-examine everything they thought they understood about abuse, trauma, and justice. When authorities brought Gypsy and Nicholas Godijan into custody, investigators weren't expecting what they would hear. At first they assumed Nicholas had kidnapped her, but Gypsy was calm. She was composed, and as she sat in a small interrogation room, she started to explain. She didn't try to deny what happened. She admitted it all, her relationship with Nicholas, the planning, the murder, and the escape. But with each sentence, a deeper truth began to emerge. Gypsy explained how her mother had forced her to pretend to be disabled, had lied to doctors, and controlled every aspect of her life. She had been made to believe she was terminally ill, mentally impaired, and incapable of surviving on her own. She had been fed through a tube unnecessarily, given medication she didn't need, and forbidden to walk even though she could. She didn't know her real age for years. She had never gone to school, never had a friend, never gone on a real date. Her entire life was built on fiction. She cried as she spoke, but not about the murder. She cried for the life she never had. Meanwhile, Nicholas Godijan gave his own version of events. He admitted to stabbing Dee at Gypsy's request. He described their fantasy-based relationship, his desire to protect Gypsy, and the strange dynamic they had formed online. In his eyes, he wasn't a murderer, he was a savior. He believed he was rescuing the woman he loved, but the law didn't see it that way. As the case gained media attention, the narrative shifted rapidly. At first, people were outraged. How could a girl kill her own mother? But as more details emerged, medical records, charity fraud, psychological evaluations, public sympathy began to lean in Gypsy's direction. She wasn't just a daughter who committed a crime. She was a victim of long-term psychological abuse. And this abuse had a name: Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Experts explained that Dee's behavior fit the classic profile. She had deliberately falsified her daughter's medical history to gain attention, sympathy, and financial support. She thrived on being seen as a heroic mother. She used fake diagnoses to maintain control and kept Gypsy dependent by isolating her from the outside world. Munchausen by proxy is one of the most extreme forms of child abuse, hard to detect, harder to prove, and often invisible to outsiders. Dee had manipulated doctors, social workers, charity organizations, and even close neighbors into believing her lies. There were warning signs over the years, but no one had connected the dots. One doctor had noted inconsistencies in Gypsy's medical records. Another questioned why Gypsy didn't seem to have symptoms, but Dee always had an aunt to lost records, uncooperative doctors, a traumatic past. Now, the truth was undeniable, and the court would have to decide what to do with it. Gypsy's legal team quickly assembled a defense strategy rooted in her long-term abuse. She faced a charge of second-degree murder, but her attorneys argued that she had lived under coercive control for years, and that she had been brainwashed into thinking that murder was the only way out. The prosecution didn't ignore the abuse, but they couldn't overlook the crime either. Gypsy hadn't just escaped. She had helped plan a premeditated murder. She had sent Nicholas weapons. She had led him into the house and cleaned up afterward. Still, the court recognized that Gypsy was not the average defendant. After months of hearings and evaluation, she agreed to a plea deal. In July 2016, Gypsy Rose Blanchard was sentenced to 10 years in prison for second-degree murder. She was 24 years old. The courtroom was quiet that day. Gypsy did not cry. She thanked the court. She apologized for what happened. But she also said, for the first time in her life, she finally felt free. His defense team argued that he was intellectually disabled, deeply influenced by Gypsy, and unable to fully comprehend the gravity of his actions. But prosecutors argued that Nicholas had been fully aware of what he was doing. He had traveled across state lines with murder weapons. He had carried out the attack, then fled. In 2018, Nicholas was convicted of first-degree murder, an armed criminal action. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed little emotion during sentencing. His fate was sealed. As Gypsy began serving her sentence, The world outside continued to debate the ethics of the case. Documentaries, podcasts, and TV dramatizations poured in. HBO released Mommy, Dead and Dearest, offering a raw look into Gypsy's childhood and the horrors she endured. Hulu dramatized the story with The Act, starring Joey King and Patricia Arquette. Public opinion became deeply divided. Some saw Gypsy as a murderer no matter the motive. Others saw her as a tragic figure, a girl so desperate for freedom that she saw death as the only door out. In interviews from prison, Gypsy expressed remorse, but not always in the way people expected. She said she regretted the murder but not the freedom. "If I had another chance," she once said, "I might have found another way, but I don't regret being free." That quote would become one of the most controversial statements in true crime history. Over time, prison became a place of reflection and transformation for Gypsy. She enrolled in GED classes, she read books, she learned about psychology and abuse, she gained weight, strength, and confidence. More importantly, she began to find herself. For the first time, Gypsy had a real identity, not a fabricated sick child, not an invisible victim, not even just a criminal. She was learning who she truly was. In many ways, she grew up behind bars. Letters from supporters poured in. Some called her brave, others called her selfish. But Gypsy read them all. She responded to many, and as the years passed, she began preparing for what came next, life after prison. In late 2023, after serving more than 8 years of her 10-year sentence, Gypsy Rose Blanchard was granted parole. The announcement made headlines across the globe. In January 2024, she walked out of prison as a free woman. The cameras were waiting. Reporters shouted questions. Supporters cheered. Critics rolled their eyes. But Gypsy simply smiled, took her husband S. Hunt, whom she had met and married while incarcerated, and said she was ready to start over. Now in her 30s, Gypsy's life had just begun. Today, her story continues to raise difficult questions about justice, abuse, and survival. Was she a victim? A villain? Both. What would any of us do if we were raised in a lie, isolated from reality, and denied every basic human right? Gypsy's case is not just about a murder. It's about a system that failed to protect a child, about the invisible forms of abuse that leave no bruises, about how far someone might go not for revenge but for the simple right to exist. She is a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous prisons have no locks, no guards, and no gates. Only love, twisted beyond recognition. Only lies, too heavy to carry. And a life desperate to be reclaimed at any cost.